Hey guys, the Small Business Administration, SBA, has come up with some updates to their lending terms this month. And here's the thing, they are being pushed all over social media in a way that, this is really tremendous for buyers of businesses and all the rest of it. And here's the truth. These new updates are going to have almost no impact on what's actually going on in terms of buyers and the way that they're working, okay? Except for very, very, very tertiary deals. So these updates, okay, are great headlines, but the truth is they are not impactful. Moreover, it's very clear to me that whoever came up with these updates has never actually spent any time in the arena trying to get deals done. My name's Walker Dybel. I'm the Wall Street Journal bestselling author of Buy Then Build. I've been involved in one way or another in over 200 sub $25 million deals. I've been buying companies for almost 20 years. And if you've read Buy Then Build, you know that I'm a proponent of the SBA. A big anchor of acquisition entrepreneurship is, hey, we don't have to start a business from scratch and run around and raise a bunch of capital by giving our stock away. And instead, we can go find an existing company with revenue, infrastructure, and earnings already in place. And we can go get a bank loan and just buy it out and own 100% of the company. It's just that simple, right? And so, and a big part of that is that you only have to come up with about 10% down in order to buy a company up to $5 million of transaction value, okay? And the first rule that they came out with, the first update actually impacts that, okay? And what they're saying is, it's being sort of turned like this. You don't need that buyer injection anymore, okay? That 10% down. You don't need that anymore because what you can do is go get a seller note, okay? And here's what they're saying. They're saying, look, if you all you need to do is go get a seller to agree to a seller note, meaning they're going to take a little piece of what's owed to them for the transaction, okay? And then what we're going to do is we're not going to pay them at all for 2 years, which is called a standby for 2 years, or number two, it can be interest only for 2 years. Okay, here's what I'm gonna tell you. This before did exist already. Okay, it just looked different. It looked like this: full standby for 10 years. If it's on full standby for 10 years, then we'll go ahead and count that as your equity infusion, and you don't have to put any in. And here's what happened in reality. Number one. I never, ever saw a seller agree to this term in any instance whatsoever, because it's absolutely outrageous to think that you would, sell your business, let's just say for $2 million, and you're going to take, let's say 1.8 million today, and now you're going to go away for 10 years. And then in 10 years time, that one guy you sold your business to a decade ago is supposed to send you a check for $200,000. It makes no sense, to the point that it's asinine that it ever existed in the first place. It was just a little thing that was there. So what they're trying to do, in my opinion, is they're trying to pull it back to reality and say, like, hey, let's give them something that might actually be reachable, okay? There's a couple of problems here. One, most market deals, okay, if you look, let's just go with, we'll take the bottom half of SBA deals, so like the lower 2.5 million, okay? Most of those deals do not have a seller note, period, okay? I'll make another video on why that is, but I don't want to argue it in this video because it'll be a whole nother thing. Most of them at market are not closing with a seller note at all, and it's been a really long time since they have, because when the SBA changed all their rules in 2016, what they did was they largely eliminated the need for a seller note at all, because you could just go to the bank and get the money. Okay, and so now they're saying, well, go ahead and get that seller note anyway. What this does is it puts the seller in second position behind the bank. So if you as the buyer get in a bad spot running the business because maybe you bought one you shouldn't have, then the bank is able to get rid of the seller and increase your debt service coverage ratio, which increases their protection, okay? So I really think that this is an instrument, not trying to drive more deals to get done or making more money available by lowering your buyer injection, but rather is trying to encourage you to get that seller note. How I would use this is I would potentially, instead of going for the lower 2.5 million, I would go at the, I would maybe say, look, I was gonna buy a business for 2 million, let's go ahead and double it and get to that $4 million. Now I got 4 million to work with, because if I can convince them into a seller note, I can decrease my buyer injection potentially to zero, right? Well, here's what's going to happen. You're going to get that $4 million deal. When you're north of about $3 million doing an SBA loan, banks commonly want to see a seller note sort of in there. And it's not all banks and it's not all deals, but it becomes more and more and more common, okay? And that amount is usually about 10%. And so as that 10% note actually does come to fruition, all right, it's going to start to decrease the buyer injection potentially to 10% of $4 million or $400,000, which according to the update would tell you that you don't have to put any money down. And now you can buy a business with no skin in the game, which every bank is gonna wanna do. Not. Here's the thing, the SBA doesn't actually make loans. They are your collateral to the bank, and the bank makes the loans. So even in the instances where people were trying to get 10-year standbys, the banks were saying, hey, you're buying this company with no money down, and that makes everybody here uncomfortable. It makes the seller uncomfortable, so they don't want to sell to you because you don't have any skin in the game. It makes the lender uncomfortable because you don't have any skin in the game. And they're going to want to see at least a 5% cash infusion on that $4 million, which, if you do some loose math, takes you down to about $200,000, which was 10% of the $2 million business that you were going to buy in the first place. Okay, so it's one of these things where you're still having to come up with the same amount of money, but if you stretch that size a little bit and can work that seller note in there, okay, then it will be to your benefit. The truth is that I think most deals will not see this benefit. It just sort of suggests to a lot of buyers that they can go a little bit bigger than they wanted to, but trying to get that seller to come up with that note is sort of step one. So go for deals where the note is going to be more common, and hopefully the market won't bid you out. And number two, you don't think that you're going to go in with zero money. That's bad planning, and it's not going to work for you. The other thing I want to say is that it's sort of like below market terms, right? So again, the seller note most of the time is not included. It just becomes more common as we increase the deal size. But in any competitive situation, those seller notes are usually the first thing that get dropped. Next, we're going to talk about seller equity. Okay, so if you prior to, we'll call this less than 20%. So if you buy a business with an SBA loan and you have any single owner that owns 20% of the business or more, then that person has to actually sign what is otherwise just your personal guarantee. Okay, so that's why when people are always trying to go out to get investors, they go out to get investors usually around 19%. I see 19.9% depending on the deal or whatever. But the investor pool usually stays below 19%, or any one investor below 19%. What they're saying now is, oh, good news. If the seller keeps any equity whatsoever, I don't care if they own 1% of the business you just bought. They are going to have to sign a personal guarantee along with you. Guys, I want to be really, really clear. This is if a person is selling their business, okay, what they're trying to do is take all of the value they've created and extract it for cash, and then move on with their life and probably do it again or something else, right? And what the SBA is sort of implying here is, look, just go get the seller to, hold equity, and then, they'll be your partner and everyone's good. That's not what's going to happen. Whenever the seller has to sign a personal guarantee on the loan that is buying them out, that's basically them saying, I'm taking a loan, I'm taking a loan out in cash. I'm setting a personal guarantee on this, this lady who's buying my business, and I have to trust her to operate it correctly. Okay, so what the SBA is really trying to do is tie that seller into it. But what's happening with this arrangement is that the buyer gets all of the upside, and the seller gets all of the downside. Well, the buyer gets both downside and upside. The seller gets their money, but there's no upside and it's just downside for them, okay? So when these situations happen in real life, what happens is that the seller doesn't sell. They say, why would I sell? Let's take this, $2 million transaction. So I'm gonna sell my business for $2 million. I'm gonna get $2 million at close. 1.8 million of that was a personal guaranteed from an SBA borrower, and now I, as the seller, have to go sign a personal guarantee on their $1.8 million note, and all I got in return was $2 million. Is that worth the risk? No, it's not. Am I going to be able to exit and move on with my life? No, I'm not, okay? This is going to be used only in very tertiary sort of emergency transactions, or potentially when a seller is trying to sell the business to maybe a key employee or something like that before they're ready to retire. Okay, this is not something that is really gonna help us, because it's gonna push sellers to not sell at all. Okay, and so the last thing that's going on here is I'm gonna call it rich people. Okay, so before, what was happening was the SBA was saying, look, if you have too many liquid assets, all right, you're too rich and you don't need money from the SBA to go buy this company, so we're not going to give you a loan. You don't qualify, okay? I do like this because it's sort of saying like, hey, we're now not going to only favor not rich people, but the point is that rich people don't want SBA money anyway because it's more expensive. And let me explain. If rich was defined as liquidity. If you had too much liquidity, meaning too many stocks, equities, right, or too much cash, right, or whatever liquid assets that you have. If you had too much liquidity, this didn't work for you. Now they're saying, oh, it's okay, we'll give you this loan. That's great. But what happens is that when you take an SBA loan, you've got the bank, you've got the their interest rate, right? And you've got the bank's add-on, and then you've got the SBA fees and everything else. So it's more expensive than just taking an equity-backed line of credit. And what these highly liquid rich people do is they'll go ahead and just borrow against their equities and buy the business that way because it's way cheaper. Okay, and then when they're paying the principal and interest back, they're really just paying it to themselves. I mean, yes, they're paying the interest portion to the bank, but it's not an amortized loan. It's just sort of a line of credit with the equities used as collateral, right? So if I own, if I have a stock portfolio of, let's just say $5 million, so that I didn't need an SBA loan, I can easily go out and get, $4 million of cash out of that, hold on to my equities, get that $4 million cheaper, and then I can go buy a company, right? Keep in mind, this person that's pulling $4 million out to go buy that company is a pretty good example of someone in the market that is not going to need a seller note, right? So again, once you come back to this first one, any competitive situation, those seller notes are just going to get squeezed out, okay? So here's the point. I just want to keep business acquisition real, okay? Because since I wrote Buy Then Build, a lot of this whole concept has been popularized and headlined in ways that I think are slightly dangerous, frankly, okay? The trick is, I wrote Buy Then Build for entrepreneurs. I wrote Buy Then Build for those people who are like, I'm trying to figure out how to do this on my own, and I don't know how to start a business from scratch. Today, it's all over social media, like, hey, quit your job and, or quit college and go buy a business and use these SBA loans. Well, sure, but like, be careful. More importantly, I want you to be realistic, okay? And if you think that you're gonna use an SBA loan and go out and buy a business, with no money out of pocket, because you're gonna use this seller note with, no payments for years, and you're gonna, get them to hold equity in the business, and they've got to sign your personal guarantee. It's none of this is gonna work, okay? And so I want you to have very realistic expectations, all right? My name's Walker Dybel. After Buy Then Build, we created a program called the Acquisition Lab with the goal of being a world-class accelerator for helping people with their usually their first acquisition, sometimes subsequent or growing through acquisition. Check it out at acquisitionlab.com. We've got world-class education, a vetted community plenty of suite of tools and resources and supplier network, and extensive group coaching. I think we're at 7 coaching calls a week right now, and every other week search forum led by me. We'll see you on the inside, acquisitionlab.com.